What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the team at Awesemo, talking some college football DFS ahead of December the 23rd. We have a two-game slate ahead of us, and we are going to get into everything you need to know for DFS. But before we do, make sure to like the video, hit the thumbs up button, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and make sure to hit that notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. Let's bring you behind the glass, showing you our player data usage tool to look at these two games. Find everything you need for college football DFS. And to kick this off, we have Miami, Ohio taking on North Texas. This is a game with a 2-point spread in favor of Miami, Ohio coming out of the MAC. Both these teams actually played really well this year, and the total's 54 points, which seems a little low to me, but ultimately Miami, Ohio plays a little slower, 68.5 plays per game. They're very pass heavy, 51.5% pass rate. North Texas is the exact opposite. They're a team that runs 82 plays per game, which is the fastest mark in the country, but they're very run heavy, just a 38.5% pass rate for them. They're the team that knocked off UTSA and gave them the only blemish on their schedule. So this should be offensive fireworks for DFS. Brett Gabbert's the quarterback for Miami, Ohio. He is pretty expensive, but this is a slate without too much consistency at the quarterback positions. And right now you can see we only have DK prices up. FanDuel has not released this slate yet. So we'll talk about this from DraftKings perspective, but you can apply this to FanDuel as well, depending on pricing. Gabbert's expensive for this slate, but we just don't have a lot of good quarterback options. So for low risk contests like cash games, he still makes sense to me. He's somewhat mobile with 145 yards in the ground, but he really benefits from that elevated pass rate, averaging nearly 270 yards per game on 30 attempts. And he can be coaxed into better matchups. And this is a spot where North Texas might coax elevated attempts out of him because they play so fast. And this projection, as far as the spread goes, is very tight. So you shouldn't see Miami, Ohio run away with this. In the run game, it's a complete four-way timeshare without any discernible trends. On the year, Keon Mosey leads the team with 109 carries, which is a pretty sizable gap between him and Kevin Davis, who's 55, as their second most used running back. But even in their last game, Davis outcarried Mosey 9-4, which is a pretty stark difference. And that game came down to a single point, so it wasn't a blowout. And then in the past game, they're using primarily Tyree Shelton and Kenny Tracy. Like Kenny Tracy had 6 targets. So it's a spot where we don't have any discernible trends here. If I'm playing one, it's probably Mosey, just based on the fact that he led the backfield this year. But Davis could be used after last week's game. Tracy, assuming, like in that case, you'd probably want maybe Ohio to get down in the game so he gets elevated target volume. But it's a tough situation to target. The receiving game is not like this, though. It's very condensed. This is where I really want to be focusing my attention for Miami, Ohio. Jack Sorensen's a pure alpha, and he's priced like it. But the guy averages 9 targets per game and over 100 yards. In their last 4 games, 11.8 targets, and he has these massive spike weeks when Miami, Ohio is in competitive games, so they get down. Target counts over the last 4 are 20, 8, 5, and 14. So tons of volume there. Matt Hippenhammer, the Penn State transfer, is also extremely involved for 5,200. He had 15 targets in their most recent game. On the year, he averages 7.5. Just 66 yards receiving, so he's not used downfield like Sorensen, but a very consistent volume for the price. Hippenhammer's a fantastic play. And then Jalen Walker's the wide receiver 3. He's more of a possession receiver, just 32 yards per game, but the guy's still averaging 6 targets per game over their last 4. So he's even in play at 4,500. Prefer Hippenhammer overall. Tight end position is split here. It's going to be a lot of Jack Calderon. I think you can maybe use him as just a GPP flyer, but he'll probably split some time there, so not as attractive. For North Texas, run-based team. Austin On has been pretty bad at quarterback, but when they put Jace Rutter out there, he wasn't any better. So On is their best option. He's fairly mobile, 300 yards rushing on the year, only averages 147 through the air, and he's seldom getting ahead of like 200 yards passing. And we've seen him with some pretty voluminous games too, but he really requires negative game script to North Texas to throw the ball a ton for him to get there. He's 6,800, which is a little expensive for me. And I'm not sure the job security is the best with Austin On. We've seen him benched at times. He's a little risky in my eyes. And plus, they run the ball so much. When you have a guy like DeAndre Torrey as your lead back, you can lean a little bit on this facet of the game. Torrey averages 22.3 touches per game and well over 100 yards when you start to factor in his receiving work combined with his rushing work. He hasn't been the most efficient back on the year, but when they're in competitive games, he's the guy they'll give the ball to. North Texas was in a lot of blowout wins towards the end of the year. So Ikaika Ragsdale is a player who actually popped up for a lot of carries. He had at least 15 in 3 of their last 4 games. But there's a clear trend if you're looking at these numbers on the screen: 15 carries, 2 carries, 18 carries, 19 carries. The only game that was competitive in the last 4 was the game where Ragsdale had 2 carries. So if this plays to the spread, which is 2 points, does Ragsdale get phased out is my question. Either way, most of his work, he's only had 91 carries in the year. Most of that's come in the last 4 games. So Ragsdale at 3K flat, like he's the stone minimum. What does he have to do to get you there? And if this is any semblance of a timeshare, he's going to be a pretty good play at this price. Then you have Ayo Adai, not sure how to say that, but he's also a change of pace. He's more like third fiddle in this backfield, but he's averaged 8.8 touches per game too. So just pure dart throws. Ayo Adai could be used in larger tournaments. If North Texas gets down in the game, we should look at the passing attack. They've had a lot of issues this year. Deontay Simpson and Jair Shorter are not going to play in this game. I won't get into that, but Roderick Burns has emerged as their leader. 7.8 targets per game, 60 yards. So you're getting like similar production to Hippenhammer on less volume. So I prefer Hippenhammer straight up over Roderick Burns, but you could certainly play him as a run back, anything like that. Their tight end, Jason Pirtle, is the second leading target getter on the year. 51 targets for him, 4.3 per game. He's fine. Damon Ward is the clear wide receiver too for this offense. He just has 33 targets, and he's emerged a little bit down the stretch here, just 241 yards for him. And from there, it's a pretty nasty timeshare. You're going to see Bryson Jackson, Khatib Lyles, DeTravian Brown, even second tight end Jake Roberts are all going to mix into this offense. You can use them as dart throws in tournaments, but the likelihood of any of them succeeding is pretty low. Going to Florida, UCF, our second bowl game of the day. This is a 7-point spread in favor of the Gators. It's a 55.5 point total, so slightly better than the North Texas total we just saw. But Florida has the highest implied team total on the board, so definitely a spot we want to focus on. Florida is a little above average in terms of pace. UCF, they play extremely slow, conversely to what we saw last year. And both these teams prefer the run. But overall, we'll start with Florida. Emory Jones is going to transfer, but he also noted he's going to play in this game, which is important at the quarterback position because they've been platooning the entire year. But Anthony Richardson is out with an injury. So it's the first time we have full go Emory Jones, who's extremely mobile and brings a very attractive price. He is the single best price-adjusted quarterback play on the slate because of these 696 rushing yards. And you can see Richardson is vacating 401 rushing yards himself. When you combine these two into one player, you have over 1,000-yard rusher at the quarterback position. And then Emory Jones is averaging over 200 as a passer. Easy cash game play for Emory. He's the best raw quarterback play on the slate. Running backs, they use 3, Dameon Pierce, Malik Davis, Naquan Wright. And it is a pretty even split down the middle with a slight preference to Pierce. Efficiency metrics point heavily in Pierce's favor, so the split is a little bit confusing, but I'm not sure we're going to see this change. Maybe we do because Florida lost their head coach, but nothing is pointed to that. And even the pass game is a split 3 ways down the middle. Plus, Emory Jones is going to siphon off so much work that I'm not sure if this is a cash type situation. But you can play these guys in tournaments with a preference towards Pierce. Receiving game. Jacob Copeland hit the transfer portal, but as we've seen in the Western Kentucky game, we don't know whether that means he's going to play or not. But on the year, Copeland is the wide receiver 1. So first of all, we'll treat this as if he's in. He's a perimeter receiver, 50 yards per game on 5 targets. He would be the safest play if he's there. The other perimeter receiver is Justin Shorter. He averages 4.7 targets per game, 41 yards. He would get a slight bump in volume. And then you have Trent Whitmore coming out of the slot. He was hurt a lot of the year, so you can see just 3 targets in back-to-back games since he returned. But now he has a larger portion of time to rest. Only 188 yards in the year. A lot of this just indicates to me the injury. He's 3,500, and he was actually the leader before he went down. So he's a pretty decent play for tournaments if he can get back to that role. Now you have Keymore Gamble. He's the tight end, 3,800. Very consistent of late, 5.7 targets per game in the last 3.4 targets per game on the year. And he's third on the team in receiving yards. So Gamble is pretty safe at 3,800 for a punt. And now treating this as if Copeland is out, the player that is most likely to replace him is Xavier Henderson, who's a perimeter receiver. He's actually 4th on the team in targets already. And then you factor in Copeland leaving, he potentially could spike up above a couple other players here. But then you may also see a little more Rick Wells. He's the backup slot receiver, 4 targets in their last game. It's likely going to be a rotation to some degree, but those are guys near the minimum you could maybe take flyers on in tournaments. UCF, not quite as attractive here. Lowest implied team total on the board. Gus Malzahn is causing a slight exodus of players from his program after he just played absolutely inept offense. Gabriel's at UCLA now. And they're moving forward with Mikey Keene, who hasn't shown the ability to run or pass. He's egregiously priced at 7,800. You can use him in tournaments for leverage, but he's just flat out not even a cash consideration. Florida's defense, they'll lose guys to the draft, but they're still a better defense than most of what UCF's playing in their conference. Running back field, Isaiah Bowser's back from injury. He's been on and off the field all year, but he has handled the feature back role when healthy. We just haven't seen it very often. 19 touches per game. He's averaging 77 yards on the ground. He's somewhat involved as a receiver, another 10 yards there, but fairly inefficient, as you can see. Johnny Richardson's been much more efficient. He has over 150 more yards on 19 fewer carries, but they have not given Johnny Richardson the reins to the backfield. Even with Bowser out, he's been in a direct 50-50 timeshare with Mark Anthony Richards, who's been pretty efficient himself. Recency bias suggests that this should be a three-way timeshare because Richardson and Richards himself have just outplayed Bowser so much. But ultimately, Bowser's the guy they gave the lead back role to start the year. So this is probably a timeshare to some degree. You can take some flyers. Richards is really cheap, but ultimately a very difficult situation to decipher. The only clear running back situation, I think, is North Texas. Maybe a 4-receiver slate. But anyway, receiving here, Ryan O'Keefe, the leader on the year, over 100 targets, average 62 yards per game. Most of that because Mikey Keene can't get him the ball, but still 8.5 targets per game, 9.5 in their last 4. He's safe. You run the risk of Jalen Robinson's now 3 games removed from injury, and he's had the extended time before this 4th one here. He was the clear wide receiver one at the beginning of the year, just went down due to injuries. His target volume is really depressed, and he was phenomenal in 2020. So does Robinson get back to form here? Probably not with Keene under center, but he's 4,800, so you can definitely take a flyer. And then Brandon Johnson probably sees a reduced role. He was the wide receiver 2 in Robinson's absence, but 2 targets in their most recent game. This seems to be trending down for Johnson. He averages 46.5 yards per game, even without Robinson in the field. So he never really took that big step forward. Tight end's Alec Holler. He'll sometimes split work, so not too much to talk about at the tight end position. But that's the 2-game slate. Let me know in the comment section who you guys like. Would love to hear it. My name is Matt Gajewski on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Thank you guys for watching. We'll be accompanying you all throughout bowl season, so make sure to keep checking in. We'll see you guys again later.